Welcome to Uncomfortable, conversations about culture and Christianity. My name is Eric, and today I'm joined by Jess.
Hello, world.
And Alex.
Make sure this time of year, if you drive a stick shift, to have a koozie with you.
Okay.
Sometimes you get in your car and you go to that stick shift and it's really warm. So if you got a koozie with you, that'll cool that down. That's just a daily tip from me.
Is this a new segment, Hot Tips with Alex?
He doesn't even greet us. He just comes in with the hot take. So
Hot
you're saying
tip.
you put the koozie over the,
you just
the tip
maybe
of your...
like when you're going to shift, the stick
The
shift.
gear?
Yes.
Yeah. It's
So that you're...
Okay.
What if it's if it's an automatic? You don't really need that because you're just kind of in and out. You're not on. Your hand's not on there that much.
Yeah.
So, okay.
Yeah. I just, just a tip out there for people.
All right.
So it kind of protects from the sun.
Yep.
That's pretty good tip.
From the warmness of it. And yeah. So
we don't have a voicemail today, which is sad. But Alex, you should give them the phone number if they want to leave us a voicemail for future.
Well, we do have plenty of interaction today.
Yes, some great
from our uncomfies as we
For later on, you mean?
Yeah,
later on in the
later
show.
on. So we appreciate all that interaction. But the phone number for a voicemail is 402-885-9930. We've had people call in the past, and because it goes straight to voicemail, maybe sometimes they're not ready for that. And they've kind of gotten worked up like, oh, I sounded silly, I wasn't ready. And then they've texted us or sent us an email and said, hey, don't use that first one. If you call and you're worried about that and you're like, I need to try it 3 times before I have the really good voicemail, just let us know. Don't be afraid.
That's true.
Give us a call. We'd love to hear from you, and we're not going to play anything that's going to embarrass somebody if they ask us not to. So,
yeah. I mean, if you want us to embarrass you, then yeah, we're on board.
Then we are on board.
I wouldn't let that happen.
So we were talking about, how should we like to be a little, light in the beginning of the show, something fun, some banter. That's why we like the voicemails. We didn't really have anything. So I thought, you know what? We haven't talked about AI yet. I'm sure we're going to have a full AI episode down the road.
Yeah.
Artificial intelligence for those
yes.
that don't know. Not Allen Iverson.
Nope, not that. Maybe that'll be a separate podcast. But I thought, you know what? I'm gonna put it in Chat GPT. I'm gonna ask Chat GPT to give me some conversation starters for the beginning of a podcast, and it did generate 10 just now in front of me. This is live. It just happened.
Have Jess pick a number.
Okay, that could be fun. 1 through 10.
Oh boy.
This is going to be our conversation starter generated by ChatGPT.
I'm going to pick 4
Okay.
for the people that you, me, Alex, and usually Austin that's here.
But we got someone.
But we've got a great
pitch hitter today.
Steve. Shout out to Steve
Russell.
What's up?
Thanks, Steve.
So I'm going with 4. 4, baby. Magic number for the podcast.
All right. This might be a good one.
Read it.
Here we go.
I feel
Number
it.
4.
Your look on your face.
No, I hadn't read it, so I'm just trying to read it in the moment to see if I can. Yes. If you could have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be, and what burning question would you ask them? That's on the spot, and it can't be Jesus, okay? I'm just going to say that one's off the table because that's the easy answer, right?
Any historical figure?
You guys are stuck. Anybody historical? This is a tough one, huh? You picked number 4. I mean, it could be George Washington. It could be Einstein.
There's pressure for it to be very serious. Like I can tell Alex is trying to go like
no, I'm
like
gonna,
he's gonna
I'm trying to
go.
avoid,
He's
I'm
gonna-
trying to avoid
R.
a Bible, character.
But and he's going between that and
I'll just
Steve
go
Jobs.
with one. I'll just go with one. Off the top of my head. What you guys think?
Okay.
I'll be your buffer. For me, I mean, I honestly, there's so many people, right? Historical figures. One that I grew up in South Dakota, near where this person was buried. His grave is in Deadwood, and that person is Wild Bill Hickok, and I think he's a pretty cool guy. He's gunslinger in the 1800s. But there's just so much lore and like almost maybe it might border on history and fable just because you kind of don't know what's true and what is. And I just want to know like what he's been depicted in probably hundreds of different types of Western, movies and TV. And I'd just be curious to know what the real guy was. This guy who always whenever he went into a saloon or a restaurant, he always found a chair with his back against the wall. And that was kind of one of the things he was known for, so no one could sneak up on him. And when he died, he got shot and he was playing poker, and he might have been a little under the influence. We don't know, but he chose a seat with his back to the entrance of the saloon and met his demise. And I mean, your lifespan in the Old West wasn't that long. And I think that there's this mythological cowboy that we create in our current American society that we see in movies, and we think that's what it was to be a cowboy or a gunslinger or whatever. But I when you look at fact and history, it was probably a little less exciting than that. And so I'd love to just pick his brain for a minute, So there's mine. Wild Bill Hickok. Did I give you enough of a buffer?
Yeah. The first person that came to mind right now is there's just eras, I think, of people.
I feel like I should
just trying to think through it. So here's my answer. My answer is Kobe Bryant.
Okay.
Kobe Bryant. I would say in somewhat a historical.
We cannot laugh around his Kobe Bryant.
I know.
He's more laughing at the historical figure.
Yeah, it's a stretch to be
I see.
a historical
it's okay.
figure.
There's no judgment here. Just like if you left 3 accidental voicemails.
Yeah, I just think it would be interesting to have a conversation. My mind went to a few people like JFK, Martin Luther King Jr., a few people that definitely died too young.
Yeah.
And so it'd just be interesting to have a conversation, and all that's hypothetical, if their life had been longer or whatever. I don't know, people that just never got a chance to say goodbye. It'd be interesting to hear what those conversations would be like if they had that opportunity.
Yeah.
Because each of those 3 that I mentioned were pretty tragic.
Well, it's not like we can change history, right? Because I was going to say, maybe you could tell him not to take the helicopter that day, or whatever. Yeah. But it's no, that's not really in the rules. You're just getting a moment to sit down with them. So, Jess, did you have time to think of a?
I did. Okay, I thought of one person I had to look up because I couldn't remember his name. Can I say 2?
I guess. I mean, you had so much time to think about it. Okay, first of all, just
real quick, I would like to go back and ask Walt Disney if his vision of Disney World and how much maybe we have to pay these days, or even people that built huge companies that are dead that.
Can I stop you for just a second?
Yes.
I was thinking that one might be the most attainable, because if they really froze his brain, maybe they could wake it up. I don't know if that's true, but his head's under Walt Disney World somewhere.
Like Walt Disney, Steve Jobs, has the company and your vision from where you started it look like? Do you want all these things to happen?
That would be interesting.
So that'd be mine.
Martin Luther and the Reformation. How much is he rolling in his grave sometime? Anyway,
there's that Bible reference.
That's not
good
a Bible
job.
reference. Martin Luther.
Christianity.
Yeah. Jesus juke.
There's also this story. Is one of my favorite movies. Oddly, it's called The Ghost in the Darkness, and it's based on a true story about 2 lions from Africa that attacked these people. And there's this group of people, and everyone's dead now. But I want to know, I don't know. I would just like to hear a story like that. It's not like a ghost, a story about a ghost, but it's based on a true story with Val Kilmer, my childhood
celebrity crush.
Yes.
Okay, just say it.
Major.
Okay.
And so it's an interesting movie, but you can actually see the lions in the Field Museum in Chicago. And there's just a lot of history. I just think those types of things are fascinating. So I want to hear stories like that. So.
Okay, great.
Okay.
Well, thank you, ChatGPT, for helping us out today. I'm sure our listeners are very curious what the other 9 questions could have been, but they'll just never know.
We'll never know.
And we're curious. Who would you pick? Who's the first person in your mind?
Put it in the comments.
YouTube or wherever. Drop it in the comments.
Sounds good.
Let us know.
All right, today we're going to be moving on here shortly to the main event, the main topic, and that is going to be tipping and gratuity, something that we're very accustomed to here in the States. So stay tuned for that. tipping and gratuity, it's probably feels more prevalent than ever. I think after the pandemic, you've seen more and more options popping up for tips. I think also just the way technology has changed, the way we pay at kiosks and with our phones and different things like that. We're seeing more and more options online for tipping. So it does feel more prevalent. And so that's kind of why I brought this topic to our attention today. And we wanted to talk through it a little bit from a lot of different perspectives. One of those perspectives is even from our listeners. And we realize that this is kind of a small subset of people. So we're not going to say this is the answer we're getting, but this is from people who listen to us and also drill down further, people who follow us on Instagram. So a very specific subset of people, but we did, Alex, you posted some questions on there and we got a lot of responses. So I think we're going to start out by just kind of going over those responses before we dive into the meat of our conversation.
Yeah. Thanks for everybody that did take time to vote in this poll. I think it's a fun way to get listener perspective and things like that. And so a few of these are just kind of yes, no kind of questions. And then others, I'll just kind of read some perspective and we'll probably weave it in throughout the show today. But the first question simply, and there's about 65 people that responded to each of these. Do you believe tipping for services is necessary? And overwhelmingly 80% to 20% of our listeners, or at least those who took this, said, yep, we believe it's necessary. And then just ask the question, how much should a person tip at a sit-down meal? Because I even know that in my life, that has changed. And so the options were 10%, 15%, 20%, and 25%. And so 3% of you said 10% is the tip you should tip. 15% said you should tip 20%.
Okay.
68%, so overwhelmingly said 20% is the tip you should. And 9% of you said 25%, so a quarter of your bill you should tip. Next is to go. Should you tip on a to-go order, which I think this is especially what you're talking about, Eric, is more and more prevalent. And 62% said no, 38% said yes. And then just how do you feel about like automated gratuity suggestions at kiosks and payments? When you're making a payment, it kind of automatically suggests what you should. 41% of people said they are helpful. 52% of people said they are annoying, and 8% said they should be banned. Just ban those. That's silly.
So you're talking specifically about when you go to like a coffee shop or something and they flip it around and you sign.
Yeah.
And then there's like three options.
Yeah.
And then it's usually like a 10, 15, 20% or 15, 20, 25 or something.
Like you go to the coffee shop and then they're kind of like looking over your shoulder, like, hey, just a couple questions you need to answer, which they know exactly what those questions are.
And it always feels a little bit, I think that's why people probably are annoyed by it, because it's this personal interaction, even more so than the server leaving the check at the table and walking away. They're just like kind of staring there and waiting.
And most people, in my experience, aren't just staring.
No, they're not. But you feel that way, even if they're not.
And they probably feel that way too, because I'm assuming they're not the ones that are.
Yeah. So we'll dialogue probably more about that a little bit later. Do you always tip based on, always the same amount or based on quality of service? 34% of people said always the same percentage. And then another 66% of people said based on the quality of service. Should employers pay more to eliminate the needs for tips? I thought this was interesting. 72% of people said yes, employers should pay more to eliminate the need for tips, and 28% said no. And then kind of in line with that, would you pay more? So would you pay more for a service, a meal, whatever, to eliminate tipping? And 70% of people, almost in the same amount of people, 70% said yes, they would actually pay more for that service than have to tip, and 30% said no. And then we asked for just some other thoughts, and I'll weave those in, throughout the show, of like other things that people would want to add their voice to in that. And so just interesting, poll results from, a sample size of 65 people, but it's fun to kind of know what our listeners think going into this conversation, and that it's definitely something that multiple people are thinking of. So thanks again for participating in that.
All right. So when it comes to standardized guidelines or percentages for tipping in various industries, is that something that you typically have a personal guideline and you say this is kind of reflective of some of those questions, but is it something I always tip this, or it varies on service, or?
Yeah, one of the comments that somebody left, just like in the open-ended part, was that in Minnesota, basically in any meal service, they add a 20% gratuity to any meal service to kind of standardize that. And to me, there's definitely maybe a desire, maybe it would make it easier and less ambiguous if there was like some kind of actual standardized, how much should you tip? Like there's a lot of areas nobody taught me. Like even growing up for me, I think 10% was just kind of what I was taught. Like you give that at a meal, and obviously that's grown. But like, for example, I got my aunt cut hair. And so she was the only person that ever cut my hair until I was like 22. Like I'm out of college. And I like remember getting my first haircut, which I, paid. I mean, my mom would pay, my aunt, and blah, blah, blah. But my first haircut, like outside of family. And then I'm like, I don't know. Nobody told me how much you're supposed to tip your hairstylist.
Yeah.
Should I ask the hairstylist right now how much I'm supposed to tip them?
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of those different places where I don't know. I don't do it very often. And there's not like a standardized, well, this is, it. Sometimes it doesn't seem like a percentage and that kind of stuff. And so sometimes for me, it would be helpful to know like a bellboy or whatever. Is it $2 per bag if they're helping you at a hotel or whatever? It'd be nice in some ways to have at least a standardized thing that's communicated somehow. So I know, am I just disappointing this person? Am I insulting them at this point? And so sometimes I am curious and, would like that not to just be, because we even see in that poll result, different people have different probably opinions from 10%, 15%, 20%, and 25% of what does that mean? And so,
yeah, I've always been fascinated by people who pay depending of different percentage based on the service, because are you talking about the service from that specific server, or are you saying like if your food was bad, or if the restaurant, like the host greeted you poorly, or I don't know, it's that sometimes I feel bad to think that maybe you had a pretty good server but something else upset you about your experience and then you gave less. I know for me, I would say early in I got married young, 18 years old. We had no money. We would go out to eat, and I regret some of those moments. When I look back on it, I'm ashamed. I feel shame because I'm just like, one, we could not afford to be eating out at a restaurant, like other than McDonald's or Taco Bell or something like that. And we would leave very bad tips sometimes because we just wouldn't account for that in our budget. We'd be like, oh, we could eat this. And then you get there and you're like, oh, wait a second. I didn't even think about a tip. That's, there's no excuse for it. It's something I'm ashamed of, but I just know that was looking back on that. I'm like, oh my gosh, if I could make it up to all these servers, that those things, or you would go out on a church event and because you kind of feel like this is after church and there's this pressure to go and be social and do this thing, but you can't actually afford it. I remember those times, and I try to stick to 20% for most all the time. It's easy to do the math, whatever. But I have this one probably personality defect where if I have a server who is very rude, I will typically leave more than 20%. And I should probably talk to Christina about that if it annoys her or not, but it's just, I just can't help, because I feel like they must have judged me wrong or something, right? Like I sit down and I'm like, oh, they must think I'm not going to tip well, or they must think I'm not worthy of good service for whatever. It's like this personality defect where I'm putting it on myself, where it's probably they're just having a bad day and I'm taking it personal. But I'm always just like, I want to, but then it's probably a bad habit to even get in, because if I'm going to tip that person a little more, I should probably just go across the board and tip everyone more. I don't know. It's such a weird social construct that it seems like it's a very American thing to deal with.
Yeah.
For most other countries, there is no tipping.
Yeah. Well, I think, like you mentioned,
At restaurants anyways.
we, in the post-pandemic kind of era, it seems like service, there's a notable difference in lack of great service. And usually it's not because of the server, but like a lot of restaurants have struggled, or they're out of a certain food, or, you know, because of a lot of supply chain issues, or maybe your favorite thing you weren't able to get, or they're struggling to get kitchen staff. There's just a notable, you know, you'll go into a restaurant, it's like, hey, sorry, like you'll read signs, we can't get wait staff, all that kind of stuff. And so it seems like even more so, there's this pervasive, you know, me feeling bad for, you know, serving staff or some of the staff at restaurants because of that. But I do think, before we go much further, because there was a couple people that commented on this and were like, you should have someone who is a server on the show and interview them about, you know, their life and perspective. So I think it would be helpful for us to maybe mention, hey, has this ever been a part? Like, have you ever worked in the service industry, been a waitress, waiter, or anything like that? Just to know kind of maybe where some of our own perspective might come from inside of this. I think that'd be helpful too. So have either of you guys worked in the service industry?
I've never, like, in the past worked in a service industry, but I would say now, like, for fun. So it's not like my primary source of income by any means, but I will like work a photo booth for different events. And so that's considered part of the service industry, but I never, it's not like necessarily something that I expect to tip, but I do get tipped because of that.
Yeah.
So not necessarily like waitressing ever.
Yeah, I think I've mentioned it on the show before, but I worked at a restaurant called Gigglebees.
I love that name.
And I controlled an animatronic coyote who delivered pizzas to the tables on a tricycle. And I was hidden behind a two-way mirror. And sometimes, occasionally, I would get a tip on the tray from like one of the parents. And then a kid would probably spot me sneaking through the kitchen to take that money off the tray and probably thought I stole from the coyote and was very upset about that. His name was Wilbur the coyote.
I'm gonna have to look this up.
Yeah, if you Google Gigglebees,
still around,
Rapid City or Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I know the one in Rapid City closed. The one in Sioux Falls might have been around still, but I think they're both closed now. But yeah, there's it's kind of like the pizza machine thing, but on a much smaller scale. And there was an animatronic coyote delivery. So we had to do we had to rotate if we were the coyote people, I guess. We would have to also do like kitchen and I'd have to work at the prize booth and stuff like that. But everything I did there wasn't directly related to, like, I only got paid $4.25 an hour, but I wasn't relying on tips.
Yeah. Two jobs. One of them was Sonic. And so I think that even that is kind of an interesting.
Did you wear roller skates?
Thing. I did not. I worked with my sibling also at Sonic, and my sibling wore roller skates and I did not. And I think they made more money. It's
just impressive when they don't drop your food and they make it out there. You're kind of like, okay, I should tip you.
Yeah. And so Sonic, it was interesting because now I think that it asks, like, do you want to, leave the change or whatever, but that was much before that. And I would say probably 20% of people did. We weren't expected to, and we were also not paid like a server's wage, which I don't remember what the minimum wage in Nebraska was. But then, so I was paid minimum wage, but not like the $2 or whatever, $2.13 an hour. I think is what's coming to my mind, at least right now. That you get supplemented by tips. But then I did work in college at Old Chicago. So I was a server there for a couple of years in college, and so had a lot of experience in the world of serving, and so much of my income, paying for my apartment, all that kind of stuff was based on, hey, how well am I serving? How well am I getting seated? Getting to see like all of the ins and outs of tipping out to bussers, and we would hire them, especially it was the downtown Old Chicago. So, during events like the CWS or some of the concerts that we would have there, we'd bring in, more staff from other, regional places just to kind of cover that. And so got to see a lot of the the behind the scenes for what goes into becoming a server, and learn some of the tricks of the trade. And so definitely have worked in that service industry, and kind of experienced it from that end of things.
So as we look at this, and we look at the potential impact it has, and different understandings and implementing tip practices, what does that mean to? I mean, I think from an American perspective, it's just what we've grown up knowing. Like, it's just people. I think that's why people even question, why are you questioning it? Because that's just the way it is. But when you look overseas, they just pay people a wage, and it's almost, I think even in some cultures, it's almost insulting to give a tip. So.
Yeah. Well, and like I said, even in Minnesota, if there's that law, and maybe it's a certain place in Minnesota, whatever, where that expectation is that a server is paid well, versus there's just different laws depending on the places that you go. And so you might go to a place, you might be from Minnesota, and you just assume, hey, we tip 10% because there's a law that we have to pay them, so on and so forth. And you come to Nebraska and you just don't know, and you're like, hey, yeah, I just give you 10% of whatever that bill is, and then they're making $2.13 an hour or whatever it is in Nebraska. I'll probably Google that in a second just to.
It is sure. $2.13 an hour.
Okay. Mm-hmm. And so,
I mean, that's a national minimum wage, at least for servers that work off tips.
And so I think some of that is certainly a part of that, but I do think the prevalency of, like, I don't remember, and maybe I just was super cheap as a young person, but like, I don't remember 20-25% ever being a conversation for what the standard of tipping was, like going to a restaurant when I was younger. And I feel like maybe just because I've gotten older, like that has raised that level of, and probably so if 213 has never raised, but cost of living obviously has raised, that there would be more and more of a demand for a higher tipping need, I guess.
I feel like this was, I never went out to eat, or as a child, or like growing up. I mean, I'm the oldest of 7. And so I don't know if you guys remember Hot and Now. That's like, it was like, I don't know, 10-cent hamburgers. That's like what we grew up with. And so I don't remember going to a lot of sit down restaurants. So I feel like it's something that I try to like involve my kids in now, but it was something where I feel like there was definitely a deficit. And so for some things, like if we're talking about like standardized guidelines, I'm like, who makes the guidelines? Because I think for me, part of me appreciating someone is giving them a tip regardless of their service.
Yeah.
But I feel like even since I was in high school, it's changed 4 times, where it's like, it was like 10%, then 15, 18. And I'm like, I don't know if I'm doing the right thing pretty often. And then I always wonder, like, I know that there's laws to protect, I think most people on, like an employer can't take an employee's tips that they're getting for them. But I think it's like
there's
something
some situations where they pool them, right?
Yeah.
Yeah,
they pool
which
and
I
they
think would be
split at the
different
end of
than
the
like
night.
an employer taking a split from them. But it's something that where it's like everybody talks about it and a lot of people do it, but we don't.
Yeah.
It is kind of awkward to talk about it.
Yeah.
Well,
especially because we're not.
I remember when I was
service
serving,
industry.
like being kind of in the serving community, there was like this this idea that you, especially because credit cards, became more and more of a thing, and so tips became more and more trackable, obviously, and you should pay taxes, all that kind of stuff. And so there's this whole thing of like a lot of times, servers would tip one another instead of on a credit card, tip each other in cash, and then kind of leave that as a tip, because that didn't always have to run through the system and the POS system, and therefore you were able to kind of get away without making that a taxable income. And so like I remember like that was kind of, at least where I was serving, one of those things that a lot of servers, even when they were being served, or you were serving someone that was a server in another industry or at another restaurant, that typically like they would even mention, that and kind of write 0 in the tip column, but then leave cash as kind of a hack, I guess, in some kind of ways. And so I think that's a part of that. And obviously which is different from a lot of other jobs where automatically your income is fully tracked, in a system, and you're taxed and some of those things. And so I think that's a part of it too.
I feel like for a lot of things that I do, I will pay the bill and then tip in cash, like even outside of a restaurant. But I don't know if I never did it because of a wages thing. But I'm like, I just want to make sure that person gets what I'm giving them.
That's so thoughtful. I just don't carry cash, like, ever. So it's like a weird thing sometimes. I don't know. There are different categories of service though. So we've talked about restaurants. Alex, you talked about getting, your haircut from a barber shop or whatever. But there's also things like taxis and Ubers and, delivery services, and not just for food. There's, people will deliver the thing you ordered from Best Buy, or you have your Amazon delivery guy, or your UPS, FedEx. Like, are you tipping those drivers? Jess, I know you've left even gifts for your garbage bin and things like that. So it's just like all of these people in the service industry are very important, and they do a very important job. So it's like, you want to honor that, but like you also have to function within your budget, and where do you draw the line?
And you're also assuming at some level I'm paying for this service, right? Like if I went and did it myself, that it would be more cost affordable. And a lot of, if I'm going to a restaurant, I'm expecting to pay more for somebody to make that and for the ingredients and so on and so forth than if I, took the time and did it at my house. And so that's probably some of the allure of going out to eat. I don't have to do the dishes. I don't have to do all this kind of stuff, but I know I'm going to pay a premium for that service because that's what it is.
Yeah.
So I think that's, that's a part of the conversation. And I recently, one of the thoughts that I had that kind of brought to attention, like that there is this kind of weird, ambiguous place I think we are, especially post pandemic as a society, is like a comedian, like he was doing kind of a spoof at Home Depot. Like, so he was a Home Depot employee, and someone came up to him in the conversation, was like, "Hey, do you know where the plumbing is?" Something like that. And he's like, "Yeah, aisle 16." And then the guy's like, "Thanks," starts to walk away, and the Home Depot employee in the spoof was like, "1 second, hold on." And then he flashes the phone at him, and it's got like 10%, 15%, 20% like tip, like that he was expecting because I gave, and it's like, this is getting out of hand. And I think mostly, pointing to, some of that automated availability, for tipping. I think a lot of times, even now, like it used to be on receipts, it'd have like those, maybe the 3 categories, 15%, 18%, 20%. And it would kind of even out of convenience tell you probably what,
for those of us that are bad at math.
What that is. And so you can automatically kind of do it. And I think it was a way of companies trying to make sure if they suggested it, that their employees would be compensated, but also, a way for, somebody that's not great at math or whatever, just to kind of do the easy thing and write it in and make sure it's all taken care of. Convenience.
I also think we can all agree that tipping a waiter, waitress is like tipping for food. If you're eating in a restaurant, is like something you should do.
It's
like there's just like things that
should not.
We just know we're going to tip for that. But I think where it gets confusing and why the conversation is more relevant is like, I can't keep track of all the things that I can tip for or that I should tip for. Or, we had our carpets cleaned last year, and part of me felt like I should tip this guy. So I kept like thinking about it. Like I spent more time probably than I should have, like thinking, should I tip him? And I kind of came to the conclusion, if I'm feeling like that, then I'm going to tip him. Like, even if it's like, hey, like go get lunch. But I don't know. It's like hard to keep track of. So
Well, what are those? I think we had some people respond to questions on our Instagram polls about that. But if you're a counter service for food or coffee, is that something that you're okay not tipping, even though it used to just be a tip jar and you'd throw your spare change in there or something, and now it's the kiosk with the with the percentages. I don't know. Did we have some feedback there?
Yeah, some of the feedback that people gave was, the question was, are there places that you shouldn't have to tip? And multiple people said coffee shops or any to-go food, which that was one of the questions we asked. Pick up food at a counter or an oil change, flour delivery, drive-through plate, like restaurants where I need to, like I'm getting my own drink, like maybe somebody's bringing
like a buffet?
me. No, I think there's a lot of restaurants.
You order at the counter, you get your own drink,
Yeah,
but
someone
they maybe
bring you the food, but they're
out.
not really serving you throughout.
got
They,
it.
they bring it
Yeah.
out. Rude service, anything that you have to stand to counter and come get your food.
Have you guys ever been with someone who maybe was paying for your dinner and they thought the service was rude and they weren't going to leave a tip and
yeah.
you're
Yes,
in a
I
weird
have.
spot?
And you can bet your bottom dollar that I
Yeah,
went back and
there
left
are
a tip.
moments where I had to like leave
Absolutely.
cash.
Or you're with someone who leaves really bad tips and you still kind of leave
Yes.
something on your way out.
Have
Yeah.
also done
Can I
that.
get your Venmo or something?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
This is creepy. But sorry about. Yeah, like I've definitely been.
It's a weird
places
spot
where
to be in.
It is.
Yeah.
Other people say always leave gratuity. Receiving a service or a skill doesn't matter. Show support and gratitude for that. Places where I'm cleaning my own table. So like you'll go to a restaurant and you'll take your own
take the tray.
and all that kind of stuff up to a place. And usually at that kind of restaurant, you've gone through maybe a line.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of like a Chipotle or
Yeah.
places like that. Working at a cash register, fast food. So those are kind of the overwhelming places that people say they shouldn't have to tip. One of them is close to my heart. Crumble cookie.
Oh.
Someone suggested you don't have
I
to
guessed
knew
it.
it.
which I mean, it is one of those things where we'll talk about like the POS and some of that system where like I obviously like Crumble, but one of my like beefs is like you're paying a lot for a cookie at this point. Okay, you're paying a lot for a cookie and the experience, but then it always is asking, do you want to tip the bakers? And then and automatically
It says
like,
on there, do you want to tip our bakers?
automatically that is it automatically selects I think a minimum of $2 or like it's $1, $2 or $3 are all of the choices that you have on there automatically. So if you want to not and this is where I think that some of this POS conversation is, if you want to not tip, you actually have to go in and intentionally do that. And so yesterday we got some Papa Murphy's and it was the same thing. So we ordered Papa Murphy's take and bake and it automatically was putting like a 20% gratuity on there. So if you want to choose not to, like you have to go in intentionally like remove the gratuity, which is I think a play at people's like,
Yeah.
wait, should I?
Yeah.
Like,
well, you're a bad
am I-
person. You're
am I-
taking this money from this person.
yeah,
now.
like you are, and which
Right.
I think is a part of the psychological conversation that is, kind of going back to that comedian. Like, what is this getting too far? Because I totally agree. Like, there's service industries where you should be tipping somebody. I think where some of the debate comes in, obviously, is how much and where do we know and how do we standardize? Like, how do we know that? And as a server, like, I would appreciate like if I knew, hey, 20%. That's kind of what we're expecting. Unless something goes wrong, then let me know and I'll do whatever I can. But I would think both ways, having that communication out there, because this is such an ambiguous thing, and it's becoming more and more ambiguous and and less clear, I think.
And I think it affects personalities too,
Yeah.
because another personality is going to be like, no tip.
Yeah.
If they don't want to.
They're fine with
but
it.
then I feel like you and I are similar where it's like, well, okay, how are we going to look? Like it's going to come across like that. And then, well, are they not going to feel appreciated? And we can just like,
Yeah.
we have the ability to see all the different sides of things and feel that. And I feel like that plays into things.
Yeah, it
or even
does.
you, Eric, of like, okay, somebody's maybe having a bad day. I'm going to tip you more because I don't know what you're like.
Yeah.
There's so much thinking, and you're right, psychology. I feel like that goes.
Well, and I mean, the question comes up then, what is there an alternative to that? And should America, adopt a different form of paying servers well? And I mean, I think the answer is simple there. I think a lot of people, even in our Instagram poll, said yes. It's just crazy to think someone could make $2 an hour, and that's okay.
And to live
you're
off
and you
of
have to
it.
be you just got to hope for good tips, and that's what you're signing up for. And there's a lot of people who do that, and that's
Well, a lot of times in the service industry, like I remember like any industry, you've kind of got to work your way up. There's politics that get involved. Like there's better seating, there's better tables, there's people that they'll let serve at a party, which, a lot of times the more people, the better location in the restaurant, like all of those types of things, you're going to get, work your way up into a restaurant, become one of the, the servers that maybe that's not actually tenured, but tenured in some kind of way where those politics go into it. And then there's like the first people that get cut, and so you're like, well, I've got an 8-hour shift, but for whatever reason, Old Chicago's not busy today. So I'm going to get cut. And you're like, well, then what am I supposed to do? I took home $20 tonight. And basically that $2.13, how I always thought about it was that's my taxes, that is essentially going to go towards the, so I'm not even going to take that home. Like if I make $10, an hour because of tips or whatever, I don't even ever count that, as part of my income because you're going to pay tax on the things that you're receiving. And so a lot of those politics go into it as well.
Well, and maybe maybe we'll never get there, but I would hope that we could see some change there. I think it's weird that we feel there's this responsibility on us to take care of the person in that situation, where really the company, corporation, or whatever should be the ones who are taking care of their employees and not the other way around. And that it's just a gamble. They might one week make a living and the next week not because whatever reason out of their control.
That's the part that does not feel good.
No.
How you just said that.
And that's just the way it is. I mean, and I don't, and so many, it's the point of entitlement, I think, that really gets under my skin when you go to dinner, and it's a moment where I judge a person's character. If I go out to eat with them and they act entitled to be served a certain way, treated a certain way. And I mean, I think there's there's a baseline, right? People should be cordial. They should, bring your food out. If it's late, they should explain. I mean, there's just simple thing like pleasantries, right? That's probably expected. But when people are like expecting this red carpet service at every restaurant and expecting to be kind of the center of attention, and then they kind of badmouth the server, even, either behind their back or to their face, all of that sort of stuff. It's just like, it's really disgusting. And that comes, I think, from entitlement. You think, well, I'm paying for this meal, I deserve the best of the best. And it's like, okay, well, everyone in this room is in the same situation right now. You're not special. So don't act like you're special. Like that's just drives me nuts. But I don't until, it's a money making thing, right? It's a capitalism thing. So there's no incentive for companies to change. There's zero incentive for them. And we, as a country, we're okay with it, right? We've pretty much said that passively, that this is just the way it is, and we're fine with it. So until we want to make a change and petition legislation to make a difference, it won't change. And we're just having a conversation about it. Maybe it raises awareness, but I mean, I don't know. It's a very messy thing. And I think as we've seen this. We talked about the gig economy before. That was a big conversation, an episode you can go back and listen to. And we're seeing this shift. And I think post-pandemic is one of those big reasons we've seen an influx of tipping, because we were all a little bit scared there for a while. We didn't know what was going on. And then you're thinking once the full lockdown ended and you started to see essential workers go back into play, you felt bad for them. You're like, okay, you're putting yourself on the line here, exposing yourself to all these people who could be sick and getting you sick. So, okay, I feel bad for you. I'm going to tip you a little more, or you brought this food to my house, I'm going to tip you more, or I'm going to tip you when I normally didn't tip you at the fast food counter or whatever, at the drive-through, because that's the only option we have right now. Or there's restaurants that used to be sit down and now they're carry out only or delivery. And so it's just like, now that we're on the back end of that, it's almost like, oh, okay, wait, maybe this shouldn't still be this way.
I feel like my compassion for people that were working in this service industry increased during the pandemic. And I hope that that's something that we don't lose. I feel like my thing is I just always want to see people. That's why, I mean, from when my kids were little, like, okay, what can we do for the garbage guy and our delivery guys and the mailman? But I think that those are very unseen people, even though they're right in front of us. Like they're putting a hamburger in front of us, but we're not always looking in their eyes or hearing their stories. And I think that social media really helped shed a light on that. I mean, the serial tippers that you can find on TikTok and YouTube that would raise money through their Venmo to go and like leave people big tips. Like you just didn't realize that was, you just never realized like what people's stories were, what they were struggling with. And those were one of the last jobs to really pick back up and to have available to us and to them too. And it was one of the first things that shut down. And so,
yeah.
I don't know. I think it's something that I hope we don't lose. We need to keep seeing people and seeing their value. To me, it's like a way to easily appreciate somebody.
So, yeah. And well, I think a part of, and I think we're maybe moving there next, is I would assume that a lot of people, because of the way that POSs did this, and a lot of companies, point of sales, like started having these suggestions. I would assume like a lot of companies are able to say, look, tips went up for a lot of people since we implemented this for you. Like we're advocating for you by, using this kind of system. And I'm sure the system sold that to companies because they're able to look at numbers and say, look, employees are making more when they use our company versus another company that didn't actually suggest that. And so there's a lot of maybe a lot of that going on. And I remember, restaurants were saying, at the pandemic, hey, keep our servers employed. We got moms and dads, which is truthful. Hey, come please eat, come get stuff to go. Like I remember Texas Roadhouse, like we went there once and they had all these different specials. Like we got all this inventory and these people, like this is their livelihood. Come get to go food and we'll lower the prices for a little while, give specials so that you can make sure you're keeping, the lights on, essentially. And which I think at large people did, and they rallied behind that. And so I think now, like you said, Jess, we're kind of in this place of like, okay, but now what? Like did a lot of that increase, and are people still kind of being expected to take care of employees of restaurants or other places where their employer should be doing that a little bit more?
Yeah, so that's definitely, I think, a contributing factor to why we're seeing tipping on the rise. And you mentioned it too with the point of sale systems, the different types of kiosks. I mean, Silicon Valley kind of had this boom with point of sale software and systems, things like Toast, Square, Clover. You see them everywhere. I mean, on the positive side of that really enabled mom pop type shops and coffee shops and stores to have a way to take and accept credit cards when we were starting to move towards more of a cashless society. And I think that was very beneficial for those companies. But then along with that, the software is just developed a certain way, and it's kind of developed across the board the same for most businesses, especially if you're a restaurant, there's going to be a tip option, right? And so I think people kind of naturally embrace that because of those kiosks, and that's the way the software is made. I'm sure there's an option to turn that off, but it is what it is. And I think that another contributing factor to why we see that sort of thing on the rise.
And I do think there's on both ends, like for the consumer and the customer and the company, like I think there's ethical conversations that come into play with this, like around just transparency and clarity from companies. Like I would like to see, and maybe some people would reject this idea, like, hey, are you actually paying like your employees the $213, or are you paying them a more livable wage? Not that that's gonna, some people might reject it because they're like, well, if you know that they're paying them more, then they're gonna get less tips, so they might reject that. Or they might, some people have made arguments, well, if you raise the price and it's not based on service, then service is just going to go down the tube, because no matter what, somebody's going to get 20% no matter what, and they're not going to have to actually work hard for it and things like that. And so I would personally, like ethically, I think it would be helpful for there to be more clarity around, hey, what is a company investing into their employees and all that kind of stuff, so that there's just more clarity and less ambiguity depending on restaurant to restaurant. There's not a standard. So I don't know, what restaurant A is doing, and they might be actually caring for their employees more than restaurant B. And I, as the consumer, don't actually know that. But I do think you can see it in some places. Like for the person that's like, well, service is going to just go down the tank. I'll use Chick-fil-A, for example. Like, I think Chick-fil-A, it's not a tip culture.
Yeah.
I don't think, like, I don't usually leave, money at Chick-fil-A, but it's a culture where the people go above and beyond, like where there is such a culture within the company, no matter where you go. Like, it's not just a Nebraska thing, but no matter where you go, you have an expectation that you're going to be treated, and it's their pleasure to serve you, all of those things.
Yeah.
And they're pretty upfront. Like, no, we're not a company that takes tips.
Yeah.
And I've been, at other places where they're like upfront, like, no, gratuity is not accepted. And at a lot of those companies, you will get still exceptional service, but it's because the company, I think, values and trains and has created a culture that is so high level and so customer service based.
Yeah.
That's just a part of the value on the other end.
Well, and I think when we're talking about company responsibility, I will reference something I mentioned early on, is the acknowledgement that when I was young, I was in a position that I should not have been going to a restaurant where I had to pay a tip. These companies, if they're not in a position to pay their employee a living wage, they shouldn't be in business. End of story. And I mean, and I think and for us to continue to support that system, I mean, where does that fall on us too? I mean, ethically, because I think if you're a company and you can't take care of your employee and they're showing up, punching the time card, whatever that is, and you cannot give them a living wage, then you shouldn't be in business. There's no excuse for you to be here. I mean, I know that sounds really dramatic, but I'm just like, how do we justify this over and over? And then you go, well, these people aren't serving me well, and they're not caring. They don't care for their customers. And it's like, well, if the company isn't caring for them and they don't want them, they're almost treating them like they don't even want them to be there. They begrudgingly have to hire people because we need to keep this business open. Well, then you shouldn't be in business. Like, I mean, I just don't think. I think it just makes sense at that. I mean, you could lose maybe some businesses that we value, but care for your people, right?
Yeah. And I would assume that most companies that are doing a really good job and they have servers or whatever, a service company that's been around for a long time, like, hopefully you can assume there's not a lot of turnover. You can assume that that's a part of it. Like, they are actually caring well for their people and for their employees. And maybe, they're saying maybe there's bonuses, other things that are part of that. And so you assume from the company, longevity is because of longevity of a company, and longevity of employees, hopefully, is because of them feeling like they've been treated well. And I know servers that are like, no, I want I think my personality sets me apart from other servers, or that God's gifted me like with just this ability to do this really well. And so I would rather risk like what I'm getting paid, and rather risk it on like trusting my personality and my ability to woo people and my ability to care for people and to make people feel loved and comfortable, that I would actually rather risk it because I'm making more money because I trust in me. It feels like part of that gig economy. It's like, I trust in my ability to deliver not just the product, but to deliver the product in a certain way that they would almost reject. And I've had, that conversation with servers. Like, I would reject that ability to, for my company to even pay me more, because I still think I'm hedging my bet that I'm so good or so gifted that I'm still going to take home more at the end of the day.
I understand that argument, but I also I can't assume a single mom going to a waitress job would rather gamble her security on her personality. Yeah. Like, at the end of the day, I just can't imagine someone's like, well, I'd rather show you that I'm worth it than just know that I'm going to take home what I need to feed my family. Like, to me, it doesn't make sense in my head. And I think it's just a backwards thing, an archaic thing that we've clung to, and we don't see, we haven't changed it for whatever reason. I mean, I guess that's just me being honest. Like, that's why it's like, why? Why is this still the system that we're in? Right. Why?
And because I still think, even though you're both saying that, there's more to the story that we're missing, because there's no judgment, but there is single moms that are choosing to be in
Right.
that situation and to risk it or to.
No, I'm not saying that's a bad
Yeah.
choice. I'm just
Right.
saying
But I wanna
are you
know,
telling
like-
me they wouldn't rather
Yeah, that's
not
where I
have
wanna
to depend
hear-
on that, you
right.
know?
And I think the things that we care about are people's stories.
Right.
And so, yeah, I
Yeah,
would
don't let
wanna
me be
hear-
misheard by that. That's
Yeah.
not what I
Oh,
said.
no,
I don't
no.
know if that's
Yeah.
how you heard that. But what I'm saying is they shouldn't have to make that choice.
Right.
If you're going to be a server, like you should be able to go and have a job and make a living wage and support your family. Like if they think you're good enough to be hired for that position, you shouldn't have to go and say, "Man, I hope people like my personality tonight so
Right.
I can feed my kids."
Yeah.
Like
I
that's
think
what
we're
I'm
saying
saying.
the same thing
Yeah.
in different ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the most often used service industry, obviously, is around food and restaurants and things like that. One person pointed out, and they've been in the service industry for over 25 years. Being a service provider is not an easy job, physically, mentally, emotionally. I've been a service provider for 25 plus years. You're meeting the need of someone. It takes a physical toll on your body as well as holding space for your client. Often, people emotionally just dump on others,
Yeah.
their energy or that. Like I know there's like running jokes, right, about, hairstylists, being a therapist because
Yeah.
they're asking good questions and, they're caring for people, and you build that clientele based on your service and hoping that these people are going to continue to return because they like you and you've made that investment. And so, I think there's a lot of those spaces too that we have to, acknowledge, especially in the service industry where, yeah, you're doing a lot to care for somebody outside of just, not just outside of serving them a meal or whatever. You are taking on somebody's emotional somebody else had a bad day. You're gonna hear it. The cook did something bad.
Yeah.
You're gonna get the brunt of that. And so it does take, a lot of emotional toil. And I think it would be, this person shared that with us. And so I'd be remiss to not kind of even bring that up from that point of view for people that are dealing with that. And for some people, it's just, this is just the only option, that they have because of whatever reason. Maybe it's the closest thing to them. It's transportation, or whatever. And they've got kids and they can only work, in the evenings. And so the
Family
service industry
business.
is, the only thing I can do because I can't have a 9 to 5 because I need to take care of my kid. And so there's a lot of obviously stories and perspectives that could be represented inside of here that I think is good to acknowledge as well. And not that we're not, but I think I just wanted to acknowledge some of the thoughts that people had. Another person said that they always like to call the server by their name, just to let them know you appreciate it, and which I think is a value piece of like, how do we love people well? And maybe we move into there. Like, how do we as a Christian figure this out, navigate it well? Because I think we do want to steward well. We want to be a light of Jesus well. And there are some ways that this plays into maybe our discipleship process. And so I think that's one of those things that we could do. Like, give someone dignity, know their name, not hey you, acknowledge that, and, look them in the eye, all those types of things that can certainly happen as well. So,
Yeah. So what are some of those biblical principles that you think we could take maybe from scripture to help us understand this better?
yeah, I think Christians are called to be generous and hospitable. And I think that's one of those ways. It goes both ways, being generous as a server, being hospitable in the service industry, but also generosity and hospitality is something we're just called to as believers to reflect. I think Jesus was outrageously generous, which is, one of our DNA statements here at Christ Community Church. And so being generous beyond what is maybe necessary in that kind of way. I think stewardship is always something like that we're called to. And so some ways we need to consider, are we being good stewards by going to a restaurant where we can't actually afford it, one, and then we can't afford to tip somebody, you know? And I think that's a stewardship conversation. If you can only pay for the meal, but you're having to skimp on, being able to actually, pay that person, then don't get the soda, don't get the appetizer, do those kinds of things in order to to not do it. I think. I think gratitude, just being grateful and thankful, having that kind of attitude to people, I think is definitely a biblical principle. Colossians 3:17, whatever you do in word or deed, do it in the name of the Lord Jesus and give thanks to God the Father through him. And so when we're serving, when we are having, people are serving us, I think we're supposed to do it with an attitude of thankfulness and reflect our thankfulness and gratitude to people in those spaces. And so, I think those are just a few things to keep in mind. And then I think what you really brought to light, Eric, a lot is just, I hear your cry for like justice, and fairness in this is like, we are people that we need to fight for justice. We need to fight for equality. We need to fight for fairness. We need to see those that are maybe marginalized or being taken advantage of by companies, by corporations, and we need to fight for them. Like, people shouldn't have to put in all of the work that they put in, deal with people's mess, people's drama for nothing, because maybe they got stuck in a situation where that's the only job that they can have for a variety of reasons, or where the company is able to say, well, it's the people's fault, like the people didn't tip you. It wasn't, it wasn't our responsibility to make sure it must have been you. You should have been a better server, or to scapegoat that when at the end of the day, when you're able to see, hey, well, my boss isn't operating based on tips. Like, my boss has security based on, their job and running this company, and they're belittling me and treating me in this kind of way. And I think we have this cry for justice in this.
I think that's also like asking questions, and like asking the hard questions is part of loving people. And it's part of stepping into the gap or the minority where you're seeing something different because you're on the outside, and stepping in and asking those questions when other people are afraid to. I mean, you did a great job of like being bold and like, let's look at this from a different angle. And that's what we need. And I think that's a way that we can apply those principles too, is like, it's a way of loving people and showing compassion and like, I see you.
Well, it's just certain things are just that we've carried over for years and years and years aren't sustainable. And we're kind of like fooling ourselves to believe that this is a sustainable system. And
how it's always been and doesn't work.
Yeah. And it's like, at some point, as with inflation and things like that, it's just not enough. And you're reliant on the kind hearts of people who are tipping you. And so it is a place I do care for people, and I don't think they should feel bad for choosing to work in that industry. There's no reason to. It can be a great experience. It's just that companies should take care of their employees. So, it's an interesting conversation. It's probably a longer conversation than any of us probably expected we'd even have on something like tipping and gratuity. And I don't think I feel like in some ways we maybe kind of just scratched the surface. I mean, we covered a lot of angles of it, but we probably talked way too much about the food industry or whatever. There's probably a lot more aspects to it, and there's probably other things that we could learn. So if you know something, maybe you work in the service industry and you go, you really missed this, or you could learn from this, or whatever that is, we'd love to hear your feedback. So if you have any questions or concerns, you can reach out to us as always. You can email us at podcast@cccomaha.org, or you can send us a message on Instagram or TikTok at cccomaha. CCCOMA podcast, or leave us a voicemail at 402-885-9930. Until next time, we'll talk to you then.